You know those moments that seem ordinary at first glance, but then shift into something unforgettable, like the floor beneath you suddenly giving way? Well, that's exactly what happened one late evening in a high-end restaurant tucked away in the heart of Manhattan. At first, it looked like just another dinner service. The clinking of silverware, low murmurs of conversation, and the faint melody of a jazz trio playing near the bar. But within those walls, a story unfolded that would leave everyone present breathless, shocked, and maybe even questioning their own assumptions. It all started when a billionaire, a man so accustomed to wealth and privilege that he barely noticed the world outside his bubble, decided to test the patience of a young waitress. She was black, soft-spoken at first glance, and working her shift with the kind of grace you'd expect from someone who knew how to handle all sorts of customers. To him, she looked like just another server, someone invisible, someone he could sneer at without consequence. He leaned back in his leather chair, smirk curling across his lips, and began mocking her. Not in English, not in a way others around him could instantly recognize. No, he chose to ridicule her in Arabic, believing that his choice of language gave him a shield. Safe, he thought. Clever. Protected by the assumption that no one around him could possibly understand the insults he was tossing out like darts. But what he didn't know, what no one at that table expected, was that the waitress carried with her a hidden strength, an ability that would not only defend her dignity but turn the entire room upside down. Before I tell you exactly how she replied, do me a quick favor. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss stories like this one. Drop a like, it helps more than you can imagine, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts as the story unfolds. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll have plenty to say. Now, back to that restaurant. The billionaire wasn't just any wealthy man. He was notorious. He had a reputation for arrogance, for flexing his money like it was a sword meant to slice through people's pride. He believed the staff existed to amuse him, to endure his comments, to play along with his cruel little games. Tonight, though, he picked the wrong person. The waitress, let's call her Maya, carried herself with a quiet confidence. She had no idea she was about to be the target of his mockery until she placed the wine on the table and leaned slightly to refill his glass. That's when he tilted his head toward his friend and muttered something under his breath in Arabic. Something sharp, dismissive, and humiliating. He called her a servant in the most degrading terms, layering it with an insult about her skin, assuming his words were safe in the privacy of another tongue. But here's the twist. Maya's eyes flickered for just a second, like a spark had been lit inside her. She didn't flinch. She didn't let the smile fall from her face. Instead, she simply set the bottle down with care, folded her hands behind her back, and delivered the rest of her greeting in fluent, flawless Arabic. The air froze. Imagine being in that room. 1 second, you hear what you think is a private joke, sealed away in the safety of a foreign language. The next second, the very person you mocked is not only fluent in it but responds with a sharpness and eloquence that slices straight through your arrogance. That's what happened. Maya's words weren't just fluent. They carried a weight, a rhythm, the kind of mastery that only comes from years of immersion. And when she spoke, the entire table stopped breathing. Even the billionaire's friends looked at him with wide eyes, as though they just witnessed a man trip over his own shoelaces in front of an audience. But this was more than just a language reveal. What Maya said in Arabic wasn't just a casual response. It was personal. It was powerful. She turned his own mockery into a mirror, reflecting his arrogance back at him with a grace that made it sting even more. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire's smirk faltered. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass, and he realized that in trying to humiliate someone he thought was beneath him, he had underestimated her completely. And that, my friend, is only the beginning of the story, because what followed wasn't just a single sharp exchange. It set off a chain reaction that would change the atmosphere of that restaurant entirely. The silence after Maya's response wasn't just awkward, it was deafening. Even the jazz trio in the corner seemed to fade into the background, as though the music itself wanted to pause and see what would happen next. People at nearby tables started glancing over, sensing tension in the air without fully understanding why. The billionaire, whose name was Richard, forced out a laugh. It was the kind of laugh you give when you're trying to play off embarrassment, when your ego is cracked but you refuse to let anyone see the wound. He raised his glass, took a sip, and leaned back as if to signal, no big deal. But everyone at that table knew it was a very big deal. His arrogance had just been challenged in a way he never expected. Maya, however, didn't push further. That's what made her response even more powerful. She didn't need to keep talking, didn't need to escalate. She had already made her point. She wasn't someone to be mocked or dismissed. With a calm smile, she excused herself and walked back toward the bar, her posture unshaken. It was almost as if she'd rehearsed that moment 100 times in her head, waiting for the perfect opportunity to let it play out. Richard's friends began whispering to each other in low voices. One of them, a woman in an emerald green dress, leaned closer and muttered, "Did you know she spoke Arabic?" The man sitting next to her shook his head, eyes still locked on Richard, curious to see how he'd react now that his confidence had been dented. Here's the thing about power. People who live inside bubbles of wealth often forget that intelligence and strength come in forms they don't recognize. They think money is the only language that matters. But Maya had just reminded everyone that knowledge, the kind you can't buy, the kind you earn through experience, can flip a situation upside down in seconds. Richard wasn't used to that. He was used to control. He was used to being the center of gravity in every room he walked into. And for the first time in a long while, someone had shifted that gravity away from him. He hated it. But here's what made Maya different. She didn't go into that shift with malice. She wasn't out to humiliate him. She simply wasn't going to allow herself to be treated as less. That subtlety, her refusal to stoop to his level, made her victory even sharper. Now, let me step back here and paint a little picture of Maya's journey. Because you might be wondering, how does a waitress in Manhattan end up speaking fluent Arabic? Well, Maya wasn't just a waitress. She was a student of languages, someone who had spent years fascinated by the way words connect cultures. She had studied abroad, immersed herself in different communities, and carried within her the richness of perspectives most people in that restaurant couldn't even begin to imagine. Working at that upscale restaurant wasn't her dream. It was a stepping stone, a way to support herself while pursuing something much bigger. And Richard? He didn't know any of that. To him, she was invisible until the moment she shattered his illusion of superiority. The whispers at the table grew louder, and one of his associates finally asked, "What did she say to you?" Richard shrugged it off, muttering, "Nothing important." But his reddening cheeks told another story. His pride was bruised, and he knew it. The very fact that someone at his table had to ask, because they couldn't understand the exchange, only made it worse. He was the one who brought Arabic into the conversation to show off, and yet he was the one who got schooled in front of his peers. Meanwhile, Maya went about her shift as if nothing happened. She carried trays, delivered drinks, and smiled politely at other customers. But there was a subtle energy around her now, like people could sense she had just pulled off something extraordinary. The staff at the bar caught glimpses of what went down, and you could see the admiration in their eyes. One of the busboys even whispered, "Did she just check him in his own language?" The bartender nodded with a grin. And here's the beauty of it. Maya wasn't seeking validation. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because she valued herself enough not to let arrogance go unchecked. Richard, however, couldn't let it go. That's the thing about men like him. They thrive on dominance. Having his ego bruised in public was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. He leaned toward one of his friends, whispering harshly, and you could see the storm building behind his eyes. He wasn't finished. In fact, what came next was his attempt to claw back control, a move that would only dig him deeper into humiliation. Because instead of apologizing, instead of letting the moment pass with grace, Richard decided to test Maya again. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let a waitress have the last word. At least, that's what he thought. What he didn't realize was that Maya had been underestimated her whole life, and every time someone tried to diminish her, she came back stronger. This would be no different. And so, as Richard raised his hand to call her back to the table, the restaurant braced itself for round two, a clash of pride versus dignity, arrogance versus intelligence. And trust me, What happened next would make the first exchange look like a warm-up. Richard's hand shot into the air like he was summoning a servant, not requesting the attention of a human being. His fingers snapped, twice sharp, impatient. A few people at nearby tables turned their heads at the sound. You don't snap your fingers at someone unless you want to make a statement, and that statement usually isn't flattering. Maya heard it. Everyone did, but she didn't rush. Instead, she finished delivering the cocktails on her tray to another table, thanked the guests with a warm smile, and then walked back toward Richard's group at a pace that was calm, unhurried, and dignified. Every step she took seemed to echo louder than the music now. When she finally arrived at the table, Richard leaned forward, his elbows planted on the crisp white linen, eyes narrowing like a man about to issue a challenge. His companions sat in tense silence, their curiosity sharpened. They knew he wasn't done, and they also knew this could go very wrong for him again. Richard spoke first, but not in English, not even in Arabic. This time, he switched to French. His words dripped with sarcasm as he tried once more to box her into the role he believed she belonged in. Someone beneath him, someone unable to follow the twists and turns of his multilingual games. He thought he was being clever, thought he'd catch her off guard by moving the goalposts. But Maya didn't miss a beat. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and before anyone at the table could blink, she responded. Not just in French, flawless French. Her accent rolled smooth and confident, like she had been born into the language itself. And it wasn't just the fluency. It was her choice of words. She looked him in the eye and replied with a phrase that carried weight, a phrase loaded with subtle fire. Respect is a universal language, monsieur. Perhaps you should try learning it. The table gasped. You could feel the air vibrate with disbelief. The woman in the emerald dress leaned back, covering her mouth with her hand. One of the men beside Richard muttered under his breath, "Oh my God." Even a waiter passing by slowed down, pretending to check a nearby table while shamelessly eavesdropping. Richard froze. His face turned a shade darker, not from embarrassment this time, but from frustration. He wasn't used to losing, and here he was, 2 rounds in, and Maya had outmatched him both times. She wasn't just holding her own. She was dismantling him on his own terms. Now, let's pause for a second, because if you've ever been in a situation like this, where someone underestimates you, mocks you, tries to belittle you, you know the sweetness of flipping the script. It's not about revenge, not really. It's about standing tall, about letting them see that their assumptions don't define you. That's what Maya was doing in that moment. She wasn't just defending herself. She was proving a point bigger than the room she was in. Back at the table, Richard forced a smirk, though his eyes betrayed him. He picked up his fork, twirled it between his fingers like he was suddenly disinterested, and muttered something dismissive. But it was too late. The room had already shifted. His friends didn't see him as the powerful billionaire anymore. They saw him as a man being outclassed by the very person he tried to ridicule. Maya, once again, didn't linger. She gave a polite nod, turned on her heel, and returned to the bar. Her composure was unshaken, almost regal, and the contrast between her grace and his floundering arrogance couldn't have been clearer. At the bar, the staff tried to hide their admiration, but you could see it in their faces. The bartender leaned over and whispered, "Girl, where did you learn all that?" Maya just smiled and shrugged, as if it was no big deal. But inside, she knew the weight of what just happened. For Richard, though, the weight was unbearable. His pride was cracking under the pressure. He glanced around the restaurant and caught a few patrons still looking his way, curious, maybe even judgmental. That was the last thing he wanted, eyes on him. Not for his wealth, not for his power, but for his humiliation. And that's when he made his mistake. Because instead of letting it go, instead of retreating quietly and salvaging what dignity he had left, Richard doubled down. He leaned back in his chair, took a long sip of wine, and decided to push further. If language wasn't enough to put Maya in her place, he'd use money. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, waved it in the air like bait, and said loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "Why don't you translate the specials into all your languages for me, sweetheart? Consider it extra credit." The insult wasn't subtle. It was blatant, degrading, dripping with condescension. His friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty in his tone. Some of them even looked like they wanted to intervene, but none of them dared. After all, Richard was the one footing the bill for the evening. The room tensed. People held their breath, waiting to see how Maya would respond this time. And trust me, her reply would not only silence him once and for all, but leave the entire restaurant erupting in a way no one saw coming. The $100 bill hovered in the air like a dare. Richard didn't just offer it. He flaunted it, pinched between two fingers, waving lazily as though it could summon dignity on his terms. A hush slid over the room. Even the bartender stilled, one hand on a shaker, waiting. Money talks, they say, but sometimes it just exposes who's doing the talking. Maya didn't reach for it. She didn't even glance at the bill. She set her tray down on the side station with deliberate care, the faint clink of glass against wood the only sound for a heartbeat. And then she turned, squared up, and stepped into the space between showmanship and respect. "Sir," she said, steady as a metronome, "I don't perform on command." She let the sentence breathe. No heat, no tremor, just a boundary, cleanly drawn. Then, because she wasn't there to fight, she was there to work. She shifted her tone, professional again. "Would you like to hear the specials in English, as I present them to every guest? Or would you prefer I ask my manager to assist your table?" The phrasing wasn't a threat, but the subtext was unmistakable. "There's a line, and you've crossed it." Richard's smirk twitched. "You're sensitive," he said, as if the word were an insult. He tipped the bill toward her face. "Come on, make it fun. Translate. Arabic, French, whatever you people learn." The phrase landed like gravel. A couple at the neighboring table exchanged a look. A man in a navy blazer murmured, "That's not okay," and his date's eyebrows angled into a frown. Farther back, one of the runners, barely 20, cheek still boyish, watched with that stiff, helpless posture you see in service workers when trouble blooms. Maya didn't blink. "Respect isn't extra credit," she replied, and this time she said it in Arabic first. Rich, rounded vowels, then in French, clipped and precise, before repeating in English for the table. The translation wasn't for his benefit. It was for the room, for the witnesses, for the staff who needed to know that there were safe, fluent names for the thing happening here. Richard laughed, but the sound snagged on the linen of the moment. "Fine," he said, leaning back. "You don't want the money? Your loss." He slapped the bill onto the tablecloth, where it lay like a little flag of conquest. "We'll start with the specials in Spanish." The way he said it, like he was picking a flavor, made something in the air go taut. Now, Maya could have torched him. She could have rattled off the specials in 4 or 5 languages with the casual ease of a polyglot and watched him shrink into his suit. She could have dunked him publicly and earned a round of applause. But there's a difference between spectacle and power, and she wasn't in the business of putting on a circus. She was in the business of naming what matters. So she chose a narrower beam. "The chef's special tonight," she began in English, eyes never leaving his, "is a slow-braised lamb shoulder with preserved lemon, apricot, and cumin, served over saffron couscous and charred spring onions. There's also a roasted sea bass with fennel and blood orange, and a vegetarian tagine that honestly outshines the meat." She paused, and then, softly, in Arabic, she added a proverb, not a scolding one, not a cudgel, but a compass. "The tongue can break bones, but it can also build houses." Her delivery was tender, almost private, but intentional enough for the table to hear. Something flickered across Richard's face. He recognized the proverb, or he recognized that he didn't. He opened his mouth to retort, but one of his friends, the man to his right, older, silver at the temples, interceded in a low voice. "Rich," he said, tilting his chin toward the bill. "Drop it." The woman in emerald, eyes bright with a complicated mix of admiration and discomfort, nodded subtly. "This is getting weird," she whispered. Maya let the group have that beat. Then she glanced at the bill, not touching it, and addressed the room without really seeming to. "We have a staff meal fund," she said, still professional, still warm. "We use it for birthdays, emergencies, sometimes textbooks for the kids of our dishwashers. She took a breath. If a guest wants to support that, they can ask any of us, and we'll add it to the fund. But we don't exchange dignity for tips. She didn't look at Richard for approval. She looked at the youngest busser, the boy with the stiff posture. And for a second his shoulders loosened like someone had lifted a stone from his back. The manager arrived then, not because Maya had called him, but because any good manager knows when a room tilts. Gabriel moved like a man who'd been everywhere in restaurants and learned to make gravity his ally. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, tie loosened just enough. Eyes kind but unblinking. "Everything all right here?" he asked, voice pitched to carry only to the table, not the entire dining room. Maya gave him the barest nod. "All good, thank you," she said, which in restaurant speak means we're on the edge, but I've got it. Gabriel read the subtext. He turned to Richard's group with a host's signature smile. "I'm Gabriel, the manager. I'm here to make sure you have a wonderful evening. If there's anything we can do to improve your experience, please let me know." The words were hospitable. The stance was protective. He placed a hand on the back of Maya's chair. A small, silent checksum of support, then stepped back, hovering within reach. Richard clocked the geometry and tried a new angle. "Gabriel," he said, "you should know your staff is spirited." He tried to make it sound charming, the way people who've been told no will rebrand the moment to save face. "I offered her a generous tip to, showcase the specials for the table. She declined." He flicked his eyes at Maya, then at the bill, as if to say, "Behold, the ungrateful." Gabriel didn't look at the money. "Our staff isn't obligated to accept anything that makes them uncomfortable," he said, still smiling, still calm. "And they're encouraged to set boundaries when needed. That's part of our service standards." The phrasing was surgical policy, not opinion, offering Richard no soft target to argue with. For a heartbeat, you could hear Richard calculating. Fight the manager? Escalate? Threaten a review? A lawsuit? A social media tantrum? He weighed his options and chose bravado. "You know who I am?" he said. Not a question, exactly. A script. "I could buy this place before the check arrives." Gabriel's smile didn't budge. "You could," he said mildly, "but you won't buy our values. Those are not for sale." And that line, gentle, almost throwaway, landed like a slow bell toll reverberating through the room. At the bar, the bartender exhaled a laugh he'd been holding. The runner's eyes shone. The couple in navy and gold squeezed each other's hands under the table. And the woman in emerald, finally, let the tension riding her spine dissolve. "Thank you," she murmured into her glass. Maya looked at the $100 bill again, now just paper, stripped of its swagger, and slid a small, folded receipt envelope over it with 2 fingers, covering it like you would a candle at the end of a vigil. Not making a show, not shaming, just closing the tab on the power play. "I'll give you a moment to decide on your entrees," she said. "I'll be right back with water for the table." Then to Gabriel, quietly, "We're fine." And to the youngest busser, even quieter, "Breathe." On her way to the bar, a voice caught her from the two-top by the window, an older woman with silver braids and eyes that saw more than the surface of things. "Excuse me," the woman said, in Arabic first, soft and precise. "That was beautifully said." Then in English, "Your pronunciation, Levantine with a hint of Maghribi influence. You've traveled." She smiled like she'd just been handed a rare book. Maya's guard melted into gratitude. "Rabat and Beirut," she replied, in Arabic again, quick as a wink. "And a grandmother who insisted language is a passport and a promise." The older woman's companion, a professor by the look of the leather satchel and ink-stained fingers, leaned forward. "I teach Arabic at Columbia," he said, eyes bright. "If your schedule allows, I'd love to invite you to speak to my students about code switching and power dynamics in service spaces." He said it like an idea he couldn't believe he'd just lucked into. Richard heard the word Columbia and flinched. Recognition, envy, something sour. He glanced at the older woman, recalibrating. Across 10,000 business deals, he had trained himself to read a room and pivot to advantage. He wasn't done trying. "Professor," he called, tones suddenly cordial. I fund a fellowship there. Perhaps we can. The professor lifted a palm without looking his way. Not tonight, he said simply. Tonight you might try listening. You could almost see the sandcastle of Richard's social armor cave in at the tide of that sentence. He reached for the bill beneath the envelope, then thought better of it, fingers curling back. He traced the condensation on his wineglass instead, shoulders tightening beneath the suit as if the fabric, not the evening, was suffocating him. At the side station, Maya filled a pitcher with water and watched it spin into a cold, clear vortex. She let her breath sink with the flow. Moments like this had a way of rerouting you in your own feet. She remembered her grandmother's hands, warm and weathered, kneading dough while reciting phrases in 3 languages. Names for spice, for time, for kindness. She remembered a cafe off Gemeza where the barista called everyone Habibi and meant it. And a dawn bus ride into the Riff where a woman shared oranges without expecting a thank you. The world had given her vocabularies for connection. Tonight it had asked for one more. When she returned to the table, she set the water down, poured, and asked for their order like nothing had happened. Because service, at its best, is dignified continuity. The group's answers came haltingly at first. The woman in emerald ordered the sea base. The silver-templed friend chose the lamb. Richard cleared his throat and said, Tajin, as if the syllables were heavier than the clay pot it would arrive in. As Maya wrote, a small, decisive thing happened. The youngest busser stepped forward, took the receipt envelope carefully, and whispered, for the staff fund? She nodded once. He slipped the bill inside, sealed it, and slid it into the locked box near the host's stand. No show, no victory lap, just process. In that tiny choreography, the restaurant found its spine. Maya thanked the table and turned to leave, and that's when Richard spoke again lower, stripped of swagger, teetering on the narrow bridge between defensiveness and reflection. Where'd you learn all that? He asked. Not the languages, exactly. The poise, the ability to turn a storm into a still lake. Maya paused, looked at him, not around him, not through him, and said, by being underestimated. Then, almost kindly, it's a good classroom if you let it be. She moved to the next table, and the jazz trio, as if on cue, found its way back to the melody it had abandoned. Glasses clinked. Forks found plates. The dining room remembered how to breathe. At the bar, Gabriel watched the equilibrium resettle and allowed himself a small smile before taking a phone call near the service door. Only, this story wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because as the entrees were fired and the room slid toward dessert, a ripple from the outside world seeped into the restaurant. A notification buzz here, a sideways glance there, a sotto voce whisper of a headline. Someone had caught the earlier exchange on their phone. Not the worst of it, not the fullest of it, but enough, and posted it. The caption was clumsy, the angle was off, but the gist traveled at the speed of outrage. Billionaire mocks Waitress, gets answered in Arabic and French. The screen glow turned a few faces pale. And in the corner, the older woman with silver braids set down her fork like she could feel a cultural moment about to get mangled by the internet's blunt teeth. Maya didn't know yet. Richard didn't either. But the room did. And by the time the Tajin landed in front of him, steaming and fragrant and unreasonably good, the story that belonged inside those 4 walls had started to grow legs. What people would do with it, weaponize, sanitize, monetize, or honor, would depend on what happened next, inside the only place that still held the full truth. The restaurant where a boundary had been drawn, and a bill had been turned into a quiet kind of justice. The restaurant should have been winding into that easy rhythm of mid-evening. The part of service where entrees hit tables, glasses refill steadily, and the energy hums like a well-tuned engine. But not tonight. There was a subtle shift in the air, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but palpable to those who were tuned in. The tension at Richard's table had loosened slightly, sure, but the room itself had become hyper-aware of him, of Maya, of the invisible thread tying them together. And outside those walls, the first tremors of the story had already begun rippling through social media. A diner 2 tables over, young, quick with their phone, always looking for a moment to post, had caught part of the exchange. They didn't capture Maya's measured brilliance or Gabriel's calm intervention. They captured only the sharp edge, Richard mocking her in Arabic, followed by Maya's instant reply in the same language. It was raw, imperfect, but enough to ignite. The caption, hastily typed, read, "Billionaire tries to clown Waitress in Arabic, but she claps back fluently." Whole room froze. Eyes fire #respect. By the time Maya was balancing another tray, that clip had already been shared hundreds of times, leaping from one feed to another like sparks catching on dry grass. Inside, though, she didn't know any of it yet. She was just doing what she always did, moving with purpose, steadying her breath, focusing on the rhythm of service. The lamb shoulder went to the silver-templed man, the sea base to the woman in emerald, the tagine to Richard. She placed each plate with quiet precision, describing them briefly but without ceremony. The kind of calm professionalism that reminded the room, this is still a restaurant. This is still dinner. Let's not lose the thread. But as she set down Richard's plate, he spoke again. His voice was lower now, stripped of arrogance, though not completely free of it. "You know," he muttered, almost as if talking to himself but loud enough for her to hear, "people don't usually talk to me like that." Maya met his eyes briefly. "Maybe they should," she said softly, then turned to the next guest, pouring water without breaking stride. That answer lingered at the table like smoke. Richard's companions shifted in their seats, some hiding smirks, others avoiding eye contact. The woman in emerald took her fork to the fish delicately, but her lips curved just enough to betray a silent cheer. Meanwhile, across the room, Gabriel leaned against the bar, speaking in low tones to the bartender. His phone buzzed twice, a notification he couldn't ignore. He glanced at the screen, sighed, and pocketed it again. The outside world was creeping in. Maya didn't notice until she collected empty glasses from another table and caught a diner holding their phone toward her, whispering something to their friend. The look on their faces wasn't just curiosity, it was recognition. Her stomach dipped slightly, but she kept her composure. Service was about composure, after all. She wasn't going to let a screen pull her out of her flow. But screens are relentless. Within an hour, the clip had jumped platforms. One journalist had retweeted it with the caption, "This waitress's response deserves a standing ovation. Dignity speaks every language." Comments poured in, praise, debate, speculation about who the billionaire was. Some users claimed to recognize Richard instantly. Others demanded his name. The fire was spreading, and none of the people actually in that restaurant knew how hot it was burning yet. At Richard's table, the food was stunning, of course it was. The kitchen never failed, but he barely touched his tagine. He picked at it distractedly, shoulders tight. The man wasn't just eating, he was swallowing the bitter taste of exposure. He knew he'd been rattled, but he didn't yet know that his humiliation was being broadcast in real time. Maya, for her part, moved like nothing was different. But inside, there was a subtle shift. She felt it in the way people looked at her now, not just guests, but staff too. The youngest busser gave her a small, conspiratorial smile as they crossed paths by the dish pit. The bartender slid her a glass of water without asking, like an offering of solidarity. The silver-braided woman by the window gave her a nod each time their eyes met, quiet encouragement. It wasn't fame. Not yet. It was resonance. Something she'd said had cracked open a space in the room, and people were responding. But the night wasn't over, and Richard wasn't finished being tested. Because as dessert menus were handed out and the first cappuccinos hissed to life at the espresso machine, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it idly, then frowned. His thumb scrolled, his face drained of color. The clip had reached him. The irony was almost too sharp. The man who lived by public image, who carefully curated every headline and photo op, was now watching himself get dismantled in 30 shaky seconds of cell phone footage. His insult, his arrogance, laid bare for millions of strangers to dissect. And worse, the waitress he mocked was the hero of the story. His breathing quickened. He glanced around the restaurant like the walls were closing in, like everyone suddenly knew. And maybe they didn't. Not yet. But soon they would. He slammed his phone face down on the table. His companions froze. Maya, approaching with a tray of espresso, caught the movement but didn't flinch. She set down the cups, her expression neutral. Richard's hand clenched into a fist beside the saucer. His pride was on fire now, not just from the exchange itself but from the realization that he wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. The story had escaped him, and it wasn't one he could buy back. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Instead of lashing out, instead of trying to reclaim power with another cruel remark, Richard went quiet. His silence was heavier than his words had ever been. He just sat there, staring at his untouched dessert menu, jaw clenched, eyes distant. The billionaire who had mocked a waitress was suddenly the man being studied, dissected, judged, not by her words anymore, but by the world's. And Maya? She simply moved on to the next table, her tray balance steady, her composure unshaken, because she knew something Richard was only just beginning to learn. Dignity doesn't need an audience. It holds its own, whether the room is watching or not. By the time the first desserts reached the dining room, the outside world had already shifted the balance of the evening. The video wasn't just circulating anymore. It was exploding. Retweets had turned into think pieces, comments had turned into debates, and within an hour, hashtags were trending. Hashtag respect speaks every language. Hashtag billionaire owned. Hashtag waitress wisdom. Screens glowed at tables across the restaurant. Diners tried to be discreet, lowering their phones beneath the tablecloths, but their sideways glances gave them away. Some had recognized Richard. Others were piecing it together. The hum of conversation carried his name now, tucked between bites of creme brulee and spoonfuls of panna cotta. Maya didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She could feel the vibration of something bigger pressing in on the room, but her focus was still here, refilling water, delivering tiramisu, making sure the couple celebrating their anniversary got the extra chocolate drizzle they requested. Service first. Always service. Richard, on the other hand, was unraveling. His companions noticed it, the way his jaw tightened each time a phone buzzed, the way his fork scraped against porcelain like nails on a chalkboard. He wasn't the master of the table anymore. He was the subject, the headline, and it terrified him. Finally, unable to contain himself, he stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. Heads turned. He adjusted his cufflinks like armor and announced, "I need some air." No one at his table argued. He stormed toward the entrance, the maitre d' stepping aside instinctively. The door closed behind him, and for a moment, the restaurant exhaled. Maya carried another tray past his empty chair, and one of his companions, the woman in emerald, looked up at her. "You handled that with grace," she said softly. Maya just nodded, a professional half-smile, and moved on. Compliments weren't the point. Survival was. But outside, Richard's survival was already in jeopardy. A small cluster of people had gathered, phones in hand. Someone whispered, "That's him." And suddenly flashes sparked. Questions were hurled. "What do you have to say about mocking your waitress? Do you deny what she said? Are you going to apologize?" He raised a hand to shield his face, but it was too late. His silence, his glare, his attempt to push past the crowd. All of it became more fuel. Another clip, another angle, another headline. The machine was spinning, and he was caught inside. Inside the restaurant, Gabriel finally approached Maya. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his tone steady, but his eyes sharp with concern. "I'm fine," she replied. "Just doing my job." He nodded. "I know. But listen, things are moving fast out there. That video? It's not just some random post anymore. Journalists are tagging the restaurant. People are asking for your name." Maya stiffened. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't sought attention. All she wanted was to set a boundary, to hold her dignity. But dignity, once witnessed, sometimes refuses to stay private. "Do me a favor," Gabriel continued. "Stay steady. I'll handle the calls. If anyone asks, we protect our staff first." "Got it." She nodded again, grateful for his shield, even as her chest tightened. "Protect our staff." The words felt like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Richard returned to the table, face pale but jaw locked in defiance. His companions looked at him with a mix of discomfort and pity. He didn't mention the crowd outside. He didn't touch his dessert. He simply asked for the check. When Maya brought it, he avoided her eyes. For the first time all night, he said nothing. Not in Arabic, not in French, not in English. Silence. He scribbled his signature, tossed the pen down, and left without another word. His entourage followed like shadows, the door shutting behind them with finality. And just like that, the billionaire was gone. The restaurant, though, was still alive. Conversations swelled back into the air. Glasses clinked. Laughter returned. But under it all was a current. A story that had taken root and would not die. At the bar, the silver-braided woman raised her glass toward Maya in a small, deliberate toast. Maya, carrying another tray, caught the gesture and dipped her chin in acknowledgement. She didn't raise her glass back. She didn't bask. She just kept moving. Because that's the truth about moments like these. They're never about victory laps. They're about survival, integrity, and the quiet weight of having stood tall when someone tried to cut you down. By the time Maya clocked out that night, the city outside was buzzing with her story. She walked through the streets, apron folded in her bag, hair pulled loose from its tie. Neon lights glowed across puddles from a brief rain, and as she passed a newsstand, she caught sight of a headline already rolling across a digital ticker. Billionaire confronted by Waitress in multilingual exchange. Video goes viral. She stopped, hands tightening on her bag strap. Her face wasn't in the headline yet, but she knew it was coming. And the question pressed against her chest as she walked into the night. Was this exposure a curse or a chance? By morning, the city had already chosen its hero. Headlines weren't just rolling on digital tickers anymore. They were plastered across blogs, splashed across online magazines, and dissected on talk shows. The waitress who answered a billionaire in his own language had become the symbol of something larger. Dignity versus arrogance, humility versus privilege. Maya didn't see any of it when she first woke up. She didn't even reach for her phone. Her mornings were ritual. Black coffee, a notebook for jotting down stray thoughts in whichever language floated through her mind first, and a walk through the park near her small apartment. But as soon as she sat on a bench, sipping from her thermos, she noticed the whispers. A jogger slowed down, staring too long. A pair of students on the path nudged each other, murmuring before sneaking a photo. That's when she pulled out her phone, and the world came rushing in. Notifications stacked one over the other. Mentions, tags, friend requests from strangers, a dozen messages from coworkers. And then the news articles. Waitress defends herself in multilingual clash with billionaire. Video of restaurant showdown sparks global conversation. Who is the woman behind the viral moment? Her stomach twisted. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't auditioned for virality. She'd only stood her ground. But the internet didn't care about intent. It cared about the story. And Maya was the story now. At the restaurant, Gabriel was already juggling calls from reporters. The staff huddled during pre-shift, buzzing with nervous energy. They're camped outside, the bartender whispered. News vans. Cameras. It's crazy. When Maya walked in, the room hushed. Every pair of eyes turned to her. Some held awe, some worry, but all of them understood. She wasn't just a coworker anymore. She was the reason the world was watching. Gabriel clapped his hands, cutting through the tension. Listen up. We protect our own. No one talks to press without going through me. Service comes first. Always. We keep it professional, no matter what's happening outside. His gaze softened as it landed on Maya. You good? She forced a small smile. I'm here to work. But the work wasn't the same. Each time she walked to a table, customers studied her more closely, whispering behind menus. Some offered warm smiles, even words of encouragement. We saw the video. You were amazing. Others pulled out phones, pretending to snap photos of their meals while angling lenses toward her. Privacy, something she'd always carried like an invisible cloak, was gone. The staff tried to buffer her. The busser intercepted pushy diners. The hostess fielded questions with polite firmness. Even the dishwasher, usually hidden in the steamy chaos of the back, shouted through the pass window, Maya, we're proud of you. It helped, but it didn't erase the unease coiling in her chest. By midday, the first interview requests arrived. One from a local TV station, another from a national morning show. Gabriel pulled her aside. "They want you," he said. "But you don't have to do this. We'll handle it if you say no." Maya hesitated. She had never chased the spotlight. Languages were her passion, yes, but for their power to connect, not to entertain. Still, part of her wondered, wasn't this exactly what her grandmother always said? Your voice will travel farther than you expect. Let it. She nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Outside, the billionaire's world was crumbling. Richard's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing vague statements about misunderstandings and taken-out-of-context remarks. But the internet wasn't buying it. Screenshots of his past controversies resurfaced, old lawsuits and quotes dug up like fossils. His arrogance had always been whispered about. Now it was on trial in the court of public opinion. And through it all, Maya's face remained serene. In every still shot, every screen grab of the video, she looked calm, dignified, unshaken. That image became a symbol. Back at work, though, she wasn't serene. Between tables, her heart raced. She caught herself replaying the night in her mind, wondering if she could have stayed quieter, if she should have let it pass. But then she remembered the busser's loosened shoulders, the way the silver-braided woman toasted her silently, the way the room itself had shifted. No, she thought. It was necessary. That evening, as service ended, she walked out into a swarm of cameras. Flashes exploded. Questions pelted her. Maya, do you have a message for the billionaire? Maya, what do you think about being called a hero? Maya, how many languages do you actually speak? She froze on the steps, caught in the blinding storm. Gabriel appeared beside her, guiding her through the crowd, shielding her with his arm. No comment tonight, he repeated firmly. But one question slipped through the noise and lodged itself in her mind. Maya, do you see yourself as an activist now? She didn't answer. Not yet. But the word lingered, heavy, as she walked home under the streetlights. That night, alone in her apartment, she finally sat at her desk and opened her notebook. She wrote the question in bold letters. What do I want this moment to mean? And she knew, even as fatigue dragged at her bones, that she couldn't avoid the answer forever. The story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the world, and how she chose to step into it, or away from it, would define everything that came next. The call came on a Tuesday morning, less than a week after the incident. Gabriel knocked on the staff locker room door, where Maya was tying her apron. His voice was gentle but urgent. They want you on Good Morning America, he said. The words landed like a stone in her stomach. She had imagined interviews, small ones, maybe, with local blogs or student radio stations. But this was national. This was a stage so big it could shape the rest of her life. Maya sat on the bench, fingers tightening around the apron strings. Do I have to? Gabriel crouched in front of her, steady, grounded. No, you don't have to do anything. But people are already telling your story without you. If you don't speak for yourself, others will. That truth gnawed at her. She had already seen headlines twisting the narrative. Billionaire bullied, waitress overreacts? On one tabloid. The humiliation of wealth in the age of wokeness, on another. The internet wasn't just praising her. It was using her, pulling her story into agendas she'd never signed up for. So maybe Gabriel was right. Maybe she needed to speak. Not for fame, not for clout, but to set the record straight. She nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. The studio lights were harsher than the restaurant's soft amber glow. They burned hot, making her skin prickle under the makeup a stylist had dabbed onto her cheeks. The host smiled warmly, but the cameras felt like eyes that wouldn't blink. Joining us this morning is Maya Thompson, the host announced, the waitress whose dignified response to a billionaire's insult has captivated millions worldwide. The words made her flinch. Dignified response. It sounded rehearsed, polished, like a label she hadn't chosen. But she smiled anyway, hands folded in her lap. Maya, the host began, let's start with the obvious. That night, when you were mocked in Arabic, how did you stay so calm? Most people would have lashed out. She took a breath, steadying herself. Because lashing out gives them what they want. she said. When someone tries to humiliate you, they expect anger or silence. But if you answer with composure, in their own language, it flips the power. It reminds them that respect isn't optional. The audience applauded. The host nodded, leaning closer. So how many languages do you actually speak? 6 fluently, Maya replied, cheeks warming. A few more conversationally. My grandmother used to say that every new language is another lens, another way to see the world. The host's eyebrows lifted. 6? That's incredible. And yet, you're working as a waitress. Do you feel underappreciated? The question stung, though it wasn't meant to. Maya chose her words carefully. Waiting tables isn't lesser. Service teaches resilience, patience, humanity. But yes, I'm also studying, and I hope to use languages to connect cultures more directly one day. Her voice carried something the cameras couldn't ignore: authenticity. Then came the inevitable pivot. Maya, Richard, the billionaire in question, has released a statement. He says his comments were taken out of context. He says the internet is blowing things out of proportion. Do you have a response? The studio went quiet. Maya inhaled slowly. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. The tongue can build houses. She lifted her chin. My response is simple, she said. Words matter. Even in private, even in another language, they matter. If you use them to belittle, you reveal more about yourself than about the person you're mocking. And if the world sees that now, that's not on me. That's on him. The audience broke into applause. Some even stood. The host smiled like she knew she just witnessed a viral moment in real time. After the interview, Maya sat in the green room, finally exhaling. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from friends, from old professors, even from strangers around the world thanking her for speaking out. A young woman messaged, I'm Arab American. Hearing you speak our language with pride, it healed something for me. Another wrote, I'm a waitress too. You gave me courage to set boundaries. For the first time, Maya began to see that this wasn't just her story anymore. It was resonating far beyond the restaurant, far beyond her city. But with that resonance came risk. As she scrolled, she saw the darker comments too. Accusations, insults, people digging through her past, searching for anything to discredit her. Fame and scrutiny had arrived hand in hand, and she wasn't sure she was ready. Gabriel texted her, proud of you. Remember, you don't owe the world your whole self, just the part you choose to share. She closed her phone, holding on to those words. Because while the world was celebrating her dignity, Maya knew the hardest part was still ahead. Deciding what to do with a voice the world had suddenly decided to amplify. For every message of love, there was one of hate. That was the rule of the internet, and Maya learned it fast. The day after her Good Morning America appearance, she opened her phone to a storm. Thousands of comments poured in, and while many praised her poise, others dripped with venom. Some accused her of lying about how many languages she spoke. Others twisted her calm into arrogance. Oh, so now she thinks she's better than everyone because she speaks French? Still others turned it political, dragging her into debates she had never signed up for. This isn't about dignity. This is woke culture eating the rich. Maya scrolled until her chest tightened. She put the phone down, but the words stuck anyway, carving lines of doubt through her mind. Am I a fraud? Did I make it worse by going public? Should I have just stayed quiet? The internet didn't give space for nuance. To some, she was a hero. To others, a villain. But to herself, she was just Maya, a woman who'd drawn a line during her shift and refused to let someone step over it. At the restaurant, the impact was undeniable. Business had doubled. Reservations booked weeks in advance. People came not only for the food but to sit where it happened, to ask if Maya was working, to sneak photos of her carrying plates. Some diners treated her like a celebrity, gushing gratitude. Others came with a different agenda, challenging her, trying to catch her off guard with phrases in Mandarin or Russian, hoping to test the multilingual waitress for themselves. The constant spotlight chipped at her nerves. Service had always been her safe rhythm, her steady ground. Now it felt like performing on a stage where every mistake might be captured and uploaded. Gabriel noticed. One evening, after close, he pulled her aside. "You're carrying too much weight," he said. "This isn't just your fight anymore. People have turned you into an idea. But you're not an idea. You're you." She rubbed her temples. "Tell that to the internet." "I'm telling it to you," he replied, voice firm. "Don't let them steal your center." But the storm outside kept growing. A prominent opinion columnist published an article titled, "The Dangers of Waitress Worship." The piece argued that Maya's viral fame was exaggerated, that society was romanticizing an isolated moment. Dignity is not heroism, the writer concluded. We should be wary of turning a service worker into a saint simply because she embarrassed a rich man. The article spread like wildfire. Suddenly, every news panel had a segment debating Maya's place in culture. Was she a hero? A symbol of resistance? Or just a waitress caught in a fleeting viral clip? For Maya, it was dizzying. She hadn't asked to be anyone's symbol. And yet, when she walked to work, strangers stopped her on the street, telling her she'd inspired them. A teacher said she used Maya's video in her classroom. A young man confessed that he'd stood up to his boss for the first time after watching her. The contradiction was overwhelming. Online, strangers dissected her every move. In real life, others looked at her like a beacon. Which version was true? Maybe both. Maybe neither. At night, she returned to her notebook, trying to anchor herself. She wrote, "Symbols are heavy. People want you to be their mirror. But a mirror can crack if it forgets its glass." Meanwhile, Richard's empire was cracking, too. His PR machine fought to drown the story, but sponsors began pulling out of partnerships. A foundation he chaired announced his resignation. Stock in one of his companies dipped after protests outside its headquarters. And yet, he refused to apologize. In interviews, he doubled down. "This has been blown out of proportion. People are twisting a private joke into a public scandal." Each time he spoke, the backlash only grew. For Maya, it was strange to watch. She hadn't set out to ruin him. She hadn't wanted revenge. But the public had decided his arrogance was symbolic, too. And now they were dismantling him piece by piece. She wondered, was this justice, or just another performance? One evening, as she left the restaurant, a small group of protesters stood outside, not against her, but for her. Signs read, "Respect is a universal language, and we are all Maya." They cheered when she stepped onto the sidewalk. She froze, torn between gratitude and unease. They were chanting her name, but it wasn't really her they were chanting for. It was what she represented. And in that moment, the line between person and symbol blurred so completely that she felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. The chants followed her down the block. "We are all Maya. We are all Maya." The words echoed against glass storefronts and high-rise walls until they didn't sound like hers anymore. They belonged to the crowd, to the movement swelling beyond her control. She ducked into the subway, heart pounding. The roar of the train drowned the chants, but not the question pulsing in her chest. Am I going to let this consume me? By the time she reached her apartment, she was exhausted. She dropped her bag, sank into a chair, and buried her face in her hands. She had wanted a quiet life, a life of learning and connection. Now, strangers were chanting her name, and journalists were calling her a symbol of dignity. It felt surreal, heavy, dangerous. Her phone buzzed again. She almost ignored it, but the caller ID read Professor Kareem. She remembered him, the silver-braided woman's companion from the restaurant, the Columbia professor. She answered. "Maya." His voice came warm, measured. "I saw your interview, and I saw the noise after. You handled yourself beautifully." "Thank you," she murmured, though her tone carried more fatigue than gratitude. He paused. "I want to offer you something. Not a stage, not a camera. A classroom. Come speak to my students. Share your story, not the viral version, the real one. No cameras, just people who want to learn." For the first time in days, she felt her lungs expand fully. A classroom, a space of dialogue, not spectacle. She agreed. 2 days later, Maya stood at the front of a lecture hall, not under blinding lights, not with a microphone clipped to her collar, just a chalkboard behind her and a semicircle of students in front. She told them about languages, about her grandmother's lessons, about the way service work teaches you to read people beyond words. She told them what it felt like to be mocked, and what it meant to answer with outrage. The students leaned forward, scribbling notes, asking questions not about virality but about humanity. "How do you stay calm when someone disrespects you?" one asked. Maya smiled. "You remember that their words don't shrink your worth. They only shrink theirs." Afterward, a student approached her with tears in her eyes. "I'm first generation," she whispered. "My parents speak Arabic at home. I always felt embarrassed bringing friends over, but seeing you speak it with pride, it changed something in me." Maya hugged her, and for the first time since the incident, the weight of being a symbol felt less like a burden and more like a seed. Something that could grow, if she chose to nurture it. But outside the classroom, the storm hadn't quieted. The Billionaire's scandal deepened. Leaked audio of past conversations painted him in an even uglier light. Protesters gathered outside his office towers. Lawmakers weighed in. The story had become bigger than Maya. It was about power, arrogance, class. But still, her face remained at the center of it. Gabriel warned her, "They'll keep pulling you into it. They'll want you at rallies, panels, campaigns. Everyone will try to claim your story. You have to decide what's yours and what's theirs." That night, she sat again at her notebook. She drew a line down the page. On one side, she wrote, "Anonymity." On the other, "Platform." Anonymity meant peace, privacy, slipping back into the quiet life she had once loved. Platform meant risk, scrutiny, and never being fully invisible again, but also the chance to shape the narrative, to use her voice for more than one night's viral moment. She stared at the page for a long time. The subway rattled outside her window. Her coffee cooled, and slowly, she began to write under platform. "If the world insists on listening, then let me teach it something worth hearing." Her hand shook as she wrote it, but when she put the pen down, she felt steadier than she had in weeks. The next day, she told Gabriel her decision. "I'm not going to disappear," she said, "but I'm also not going to let them turn me into something I'm not. If I speak, it'll be on my terms. My words. My languages. My truth." Gabriel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's build you a shield. Because once you step into the spotlight intentionally, you'll need one." For the first time, Maya smiled without forcing it. Not because the storm had passed. It hadn't. But because she finally felt like she had a compass in her hand. And somewhere out there, Richard sat in a boardroom, lawyers whispering in his ear, his empire crumbling around him. He still hadn't apologized. He still clung to pride. But the story was no longer his to control. It belonged to Maya now. The invitation came from an unexpected place. A nonprofit that worked with immigrant youth across New York. They had seen the viral clip, yes, but more importantly, they'd seen her classroom talk at Columbia, shared by a student on social media, subtitled, passed along quietly until it reached their director. "We'd love for you to speak at our annual gathering." The email read, "Not as a celebrity, as yourself, as someone who knows what it means to hold dignity in a world that tries to strip it away." Maya hesitated. A classroom felt safe. A lecture hall was contained. But this? A public stage, a microphone, rows of strangers waiting to hear her? That felt like another threshold. Gabriel leaned against the bar after service when she showed him the email. "This isn't the internet pulling you," he said. "This is community. There's a difference." She nodded, and she said yes. The auditorium was modest, no television cameras, no red carpets, just rows of folding chairs filled with teenagers, parents, volunteers. The hum of multiple languages floated through the air. Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian. The space itself was alive with accents, dialects, the music of migration. Maya walked onto the stage, palms damp, pulse racing. The applause startled her. It wasn't thunderous, but it was warm, real, full of expectation. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the faces, young and old, waiting. "Good evening," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. When I was your age, I thought languages were like keys. I thought if I collected enough of them, I could unlock doors anywhere in the world. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Agreement, recognition. But I learned something in that restaurant a few weeks ago. Languages aren't just keys. They're mirrors. They reflect who we are, how we see others, how we choose to treat them. And sometimes, when someone throws a language at you like a weapon, the most powerful thing you can do is show them it can also be a bridge. Heads nodded. A teenager in the front row whispered something to her friend, smiling. I didn't ask to go viral, Maya continued. I didn't ask to be a symbol. But if there's one thing I want to use this moment for, it's this. To remind you that your voice matters. Whether it's in English, Spanish, Arabic, or any other tongue, you deserve to be heard with respect. And you deserve to answer without shrinking yourself. Applause rose, louder this time. She felt her chest loosen, her hands relax on the podium. She leaned in, letting her tone soften. My grandmother used to tell me, the tongue can break bones, but it can also build houses. That night I decided to build. Not just for me, but for every person who has ever been made to feel small. This time, the applause filled the room, echoing off the walls. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. Maya stepped back, heart pounding, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from release. After the speech, young people lined up to meet her. A girl with braces told her, I've always been scared to speak my Spanish at school, but now I want to. A boy with a heavy accent said, People laugh at me when I order in English, but hearing you makes me want to keep trying. Each voice stitched something inside her back together. She realized then that maybe the platform wasn't a burden after all. Maybe it was a classroom with no walls, and she was simply being asked to keep teaching. Meanwhile, Richard's story was collapsing in real time. Late-night comedians mocked him. Editorials skewered him. Protesters followed him from city to city. One leaked email showed him berating his PR team, calling them incompetent. Another leak revealed internal memos about payouts to silence former employees. He had tried to frame Maya as the aggressor, the one who humiliated him. But the narrative no longer obeyed him. His name had become shorthand for arrogance, while hers had become shorthand for poise. And yet, Maya refused to mention him on stage. Not once. Because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone else who saw themselves in her. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, scrolling through clips of her speech that had already begun to circulate online. But this time, the headlines felt different. Waitress turns viral moment into message of empowerment. Maya Thompson speaks to immigrant youth. Your voice matters. She exhaled, relief flooding her chest. For the first time, the story wasn't about a billionaire's cruelty. It was about resilience, about possibility. Her notebook lay open on the desk. She wrote one line before bed. A symbol isn't something you become. It's something you decide how to carry. And with that, she turned out the light. It started with a message from London, then Paris, then Johannesburg, invitations to speak at conferences, cultural institutes, and universities poured in faster than Gabriel could sort them. Some offered travel stipends, others dangled honorariums, but all carried the same refrain. Your story resonates here, too. Come share it. Maya stared at the growing pile of emails in disbelief. Just weeks earlier, she had been worried about making rent. Now, institutions across the globe wanted her voice. Gabriel cautioned her. This is the part where people start to pull you apart. Some will want your dignity. Some will want your face on their posters. Some just want the viral glow. You can't say yes to everything. I know, Maya said, though her voice carried the tremor of someone overwhelmed by possibility. Still, she accepted one invitation. A youth forum in London focusing on language and identity. Felt aligned, purposeful. She packed light, boarded a plane for the first time in years, and tried to steady her nerves as the Atlantic stretched out beneath her. London greeted her with drizzle and neon. The forum itself was housed in a grand hall with stained glass windows depicting scholars from centuries past. But the audience was unmistakably modern. Students in hijabs, dreadlocks, denim jackets, business suits. A kaleidoscope of accents filled the air. When Maya took the stage, she spoke not of Richard or the restaurant, but of belonging. When people mock your language, she told the crowd, they're not mocking words. They're mocking the roots that made you. Answering in that same language isn't just defense, it's reclamation. It's saying, my roots feed me, not you. The room erupted in applause. Students lined up afterward, some hugging her, some slipping her handwritten notes of gratitude. One young woman whispered, I used to hide my Arabic at work. Tomorrow I won't. Maya felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. This wasn't about a single night anymore. It was a wave and she was learning to ride it. But waves always crash. Back in New York, the media frenzy hadn't cooled. Paparazzi began waiting outside her apartment. A tabloid published grainy photos of her leaving the subway, slapping the headline, Viral Waitress, from apron to activist. Another dug into her past, pulling out old social media posts, twisting them into clickbait. Worse, her privacy eroded among strangers. At the grocery store, a woman stopped her by the produce aisle. Say something in French for me. On the subway, a man shoved a phone in her face, live streaming as he asked, Hey Maya, can you clap back in Mandarin now? It was invasive, exhausting. Every trip outside felt like a performance she hadn't agreed to. One night, back at the restaurant, she overheard two diners arguing about her as if she weren't there. She's just milking it now, one sneered. If she really cared, she wouldn't be flying around the world giving speeches. Are you kidding? The other shot back. She's finally using her voice. What would you do if you had her platform? Maya placed their plates on the table without comment. But inside, the conflict gnawed. Was she milking it? Or was she doing what she was meant to do? Richard, meanwhile, had vanished from the spotlight, but not from consequence. Reports surfaced of shareholders pressing him to step down. His name, once synonymous with power, now trailed scandal wherever it appeared. He became a cautionary tale in business schools. Arrogance unchecked. And yet, he remained silent. No apology. No reconciliation. Just silence. Maya tried not to think of him, but sometimes, late at night, she wondered, did he regret it? Or was he still convinced that she was the problem? Her breaking point came not from the media, but from home. One evening, her younger brother called. His voice cracked through the line. Maya, they filmed me at school, he said. Some kids pulled up the video of you and started mocking me. Mocking your accent, saying you're a fraud. They posted it. It's everywhere. Her chest hollowed. Fame hadn't just touched her life. It had seeped into her family's. She rushed to her notebook, scribbling furiously. The world doesn't just want your story. It wants your family, your history, your roots. And if you're not careful, it'll take them without asking. That night, she sat at her desk, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop. Maya stood at a crossroads. Retreat from the storm consuming her life or step forward and reclaim the story with greater resolve. The choice was no longer about her alone. Her younger brother had become a target. Cruel classmates mocked him with broken Arabic, echoing the viral scandal she had unwillingly become the face of. That was the line Maya could not allow to be crossed. Determined, she confided in Gabriel, her mentor and employer. He saw the weight in her expression before she even spoke. Yes, the harassment had reached her family. Yes, it was unacceptable. And yes, she was done letting strangers dictate the narrative. Together, they agreed, no more fragmented soundbites. She would create her own statement, raw and unfiltered. Not a viral clip, something closer to a manifesto. That night, Maya recorded herself at her desk. No studio, no staging, just her and her words. Her voice trembled at first but soon steadied as she recounted the restaurant encounter with the billionaire. The insult hurled in Arabic, and her dignified response. She spoke of her grandmother's lessons, that languages are not tricks but inheritances, vessels of memory and identity. She detailed the aftermath. The internet's obsession, the mix of cruelty and kindness, and the toll on her family. She drew a boundary with clarity. Mock her if they must, but her family was not theirs to drag into the circus. And she declared that her languages were bridges, not performances. Her words ended on a proverb: "The tongue can break bones, but it can also build houses." She vowed to build. The video spread with astonishing speed. Teachers played it in classrooms. Activists cited it in rallies. Hashtags shifted to hashtag her story in her words and hashtag building with words. The bullying of her brother ceased, not because the world grew gentler, but because Maya had redrawn the limits of what could be said. Even Richard, the billionaire, was shaken by her composure. His silence, once a shield, now looked like weakness. Under pressure, he released his own video. An apology, carefully scripted, yet laced with a crack of genuine regret. "I thought money gave me power," he admitted. "But power without respect is empty." The world reacted with skepticism and debate. Some praised him, others dismissed him. But one question echoed: would Maya respond? She considered it carefully, drafting a page of options: respond or stay silent. Responding could reclaim the narrative again, but risk fueling the fire. Silence could be louder than words, signaling that he no longer deserved a place in her story. Her eventual choice was subtle but powerful. At work, when asked about his apology, she simply said, "Apologies mean most when they're followed by change." Later, she posted a short 90-second statement online. She refused to frame it as a duel between her and Richard. It was, she said, about respect. If he had learned something, fine. If not, the burden was his to carry. She knew who she was, and that was enough. Her restraint drew admiration. Commentators called it a masterclass in dignity. She had demonstrated a deeper power, knowing when not to speak. Richard's apology quickly faded into obscurity. Maya's clarity endured. From there, her path widened. Inspired by her grandmother's lessons and the overwhelming response, she founded the Bridge Project, a program for teaching languages to empower immigrant youth. It grew rapidly, supported by universities, nonprofits, and donations from strangers who felt seen by her story. Maya no longer stood at the center as a symbol, but as a teacher, mentor, and builder. Richard, meanwhile, drifted into irrelevance, his empire fractured. He remained a cautionary tale of arrogance undone. Maya's journey, however, carried her to global stages. At a conference on culture and communication, she spoke with conviction. "Dignity does more than defend, it builds. Languages are homes," she said, "and speaking them with pride makes the world more livable for all." Her words resonated far beyond the viral moment that had once defined her. That evening, walking by the river, she reflected on her path. The world would remember the billionaire mocking the waitress and the waitress answering back. But she knew her true ending was not that confrontation. It was in the bridges she had built and the dignity she had transformed into a movement. Closing her notebook, she wrote, "I am not the waitress who was mocked. I am the woman who built houses with words." And with that, her chapter felt complete.